we were trying to squeeze in a couple of other episodes in between, but real life just got in the way and that ended up not happening. So we're back with this episode. Joining me, as always, are my co host CT
Hello.
and our otaku in training, Brandon
Howdy.
and Bama.
Hello.
So for this episode, we decided to go with CT's initial suggestion, which was Fooly Cooly. Fooly Cooly is a 6-episode series that premiered way back in the early part of this century. It's early Gynax, which is always a good time, or interesting at the very least. We'll call it that. So before we get into our discussion, CT, so tell us, why did you pick this series for us?
Okay. When we were starting and when we were gathering, the exposure and the general timing of Brandon and Bama's history with anime, what I wanted to do was pick the most anime that I could think of. And I wanted to time it around the time that it felt like they had dropped out. I know that Bama had watched Evangelion, which of course has, some strong connections through here. I think Brandon said that he'd watched a little bit of Naruto, which would have been right around there. But this is turn of the millennium. It feels like the time at which whatever they had been doing had kind of bailed out. And so I was trying to think of all of the things that are very heavy anime themes and stylings and other stuff. So, having coming of age stuff, obviously some kind of mecha connection was a requirement, and both of these felt like a good through line from Evangelion. Little bits of, school life in here. In this case, what is it? The meta-ness of it, because this is kind of, head up its ass anime. I don't think I can think of any other work in any other medium that covers this level. Like, when you talk about something that's surreal or absurdist in ways, it strikes a very different picture to me. But when you're doing anime absurdism, it's fairly unique to the medium, and maybe we can roll around and see if anyone can pull out other examples. So that was part of it, because again, it just felt inherently anime. This was, a kind of thing that you are only really experiencing through the medium. So it was kind of a, how do you get back into it? Well, you jump into the deep end. And this was as deep an end as I could think of. It was also a 6-part OVA, which is something that, again, was very, very anime driven, but only for a period of time, and then got out of fashion, because you really don't get that kind of thing in modern, but very much of the release types for a while, and for a lot of people when they were really picking up anime to begin with, which also meant that it would be shorter and conceivably less painful. We'll find out. But also, one of the things, I just remember Furikuri looming huge in the community for its time. And having a reasonably long tail, but short of the people who really still delve in and do, like, let's say, YouTube reviews and will wind back to things that were large touchstones of the time, you don't really hear it getting mentioned, getting recommended by people. It seems to have been something that everyone loved for a period of time, and probably because they experienced at a particular age, but I think that's part of the larger conversation we'll have about it. But now it seems to be a bit more contentious. You still have the people who really like it, but you seem to have an awful lot more haters of it than before. But it's still north of 8 on Mal, so the overall impression that it left still seems to leave a mark on the anime community, but it's I find it interesting to explore that kind of thing now, and that's why I wanted to start to noobs back on their journey by experiencing something like this, because I think that's literally what it comes down to. It occurs to me, or it appears to me to be much more of an experience than anything else about it. Although it has enough depth if you're willing to chase it down and desirous of, but not everyone gonna be. And since you knew of it before, you can at least decide whether or not that felt right from my perspective of just trying to find, like, right around the turn of the millennium, was there a better target you think possibly for the most anime that I could think of?
I wouldn't say that there's a better target for the most anime to ever anime. I would say that I probably wouldn't have chosen this one right off the bat. I would have waited a little while before I exposed people to it. But that's just me. Let's go ahead. Let's actually start getting into the series itself before this becomes a two-way conversation. Um, so for me, Fooly Cooly, I watched it way back in the day, and I remember that I disliked it. I didn't hate it, but I disliked it, and over the years, I just kind of forgot why I disliked it. And then I rewatched it for this podcast and remembered, oh, right, that's why. So before we start getting into monologues, Brandon, let's go ahead. Let's start with you. Just based on the first couple of episodes, first two or three, what were your initial impressions when you watched this? What stood out to you?
Oh, I don't know if it's really possible to say what stood out. You know what? I take that back. Panties. Panties stood out. There were lots like upskirts and stuff like that. And I was like, man, it's like two or three every episode. Um, because, I mean, which is relevant, I think, to the story. There's, coming of age stuff and sexuality and things that it's getting into. But like, other than that, it's just like, it's such a constant rush in the first 2-3 episodes that it never really lets up with. I don't know if action is not action is in like fighting and things necessarily, but just like it's constantly moving. It keeps throwing stuff at you. It just out of the blue turns into like a video manga for some reason. And yeah, I mean, it is. I do have to say that like absurdist and surreal is absolutely like every ounce of it. I was like trying to. It felt like throwing pure like exploding color at my brain and trying desperately to like grab it as it flew by, which was, as you said, it's an experience. Absolutely.
So Bama, let's jump over to you. You had I was mentioning this before we started recording. I actually got a message from your girlfriend while you were watching this.
She was mad at you, wasn't she?
Yeah, a little bit. So I'm gonna say that your experience with this was not as pleasant, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. What were your initial impressions from like the first 2 or 3 episodes?
Well, I've got from episode 1, a note that I wrote down was, okay, so the closest I'm going to get to enjoying this is speculating how it got greenlit. I just it really was not my thing. And it's funny, I didn't notice all the panty shots until later on in the series, and then I realized that we'd been watching panty shots just over and over and over again, and I turned to her and I said, panty shot, this is why I thought I was straight for 35 years. I said, I'm card carrying bi. I'm attracted to women. Is this sensual to you at all? And she's like, no, not really. I said,
No.
okay, I feel a little bit better now. Yeah, there's panty shots, but they're not. There was no sensuality involved in them, and that's probably a good thing considering all the characters are underage. It reminded me of when people describe their dreams to you, and they say, listen, I had the strangest dream last night, and they go on and on with all these weird details, and it doesn't make a whole bunch of sense, and it's kind of boring. And that was kind of my impression of the first several episodes. Wine did not help. We did attempt wine. Wine did not help.
Think you needed something harder.
I did. Yeah. And I will tell you that with enough weed, it is it is actually kind of enjoyable. But that's not very comforting when you realize that I also enjoyed the Star Wars Christmas special when I was completely high. So I know.
Well, that's because they did it high.
That makes sense, actually. I never get high. I really don't. I use weed like once every 2 months or something, and now it's becoming a once a month thing watching this anime. That's really not intentional. But yeah, Andy said that it reminded her of being outside with her anxiety. There's just so much coming at you. I'm ADHD, and I've spent a lot of time around kids. So the flashing visuals with the bright lights and the very cartoony expressions, none of that really fazed me much, but it didn't really impress me either, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does, because here's the thing with Fooly Cooly. I mentioned earlier, this is why. Well, this is why. It's because the reason why I dislike it so much is not because it's really absurdist, but more because it goes a million miles an hour 100% of the time. And I never, when I initially watched it, and then when I rewatched it this time, I had to take it in small chunks. I watched it in 2-episode blocks because there was so much stimuli and input coming at me just so quickly. I didn't have time to process everything that was happening before new thing is appearing on the screen that I have to pay attention to. And that was kind of a big issue with me, and the reason why I had to take it in 2-episode chunks.
That makes sense. And I noticed at the end of the second episode, I said, I think the idea is if you look back on each episode after you've seen the entire thing, it's supposed to actually make sense, but I'm not actually sold on it. It was like the question, I'm not sure when the question came up, the dad is saying, what is Fooly Cooly? What does Fooly Cooly mean? And I think it occurred to me eventually that that question right there, and whether or not it has an answer, is going to really impact your enjoyment of the series. I'm betting it was really popular because a lot of people thought it did have an answer and they're trying to figure it out. Whereas my impression of it really was, it's how is a raven like a writing desk? There's not really an answer there to be found. It's just trying to be very mysterious. And I don't know. I kind of hate that I didn't buy it. I think it would have been a lot more fun if I had bought into the idea that there was a kind of a hidden meaning, but I didn't. Sorry, it didn't sell me on it.
I mean, it doesn't feel like there is specificity to it, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to it.
I mean, I think the idea. I don't think it has a meaning. Even I think it has multiple meanings, if anything, and I think that's kind of part of the difficulty of digesting the show to begin with. Is there's so many meanings that it's trying to present it in such rapid succession, where like it's almost like each episode is almost made up of like 3 episodes on its own. And like, especially I think it was like the 3rd episode or something, like it just feels like you've got these self-contained stories as part of this bigger story of the episode, as part of the overall series. And it's just trying to say so much with simultaneously the actual like text of the story, but also like the visuals and all of that kind of stuff too. And I had serious trouble because I only had access to the subs, and I was trying to keep up with what was going on, but half the time I couldn't even figure out who was saying which things because it was going so fast.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine trying to watch this with subs. We were watching the dubs. Oh my gosh. I'm wide-eyed.
I watched the subs.
Yeah, it was rough. There were definitely points where I was literally just staring at the subtitles trying to figure out what the hell was going on, you know. It's like, man, that was a little bit much.
Now, did you at any point decide, did you pause and roll back and redo it, or were you at a point where it just felt like, I can't keep up, but that's the effect that the show is doing to begin with. Literally no one can keep up with this, so I should just keep holding on because that's probably the way that they want me to experience it.
It was kind of a combo. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 points where I skipped back, like, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds and tried again. But for the most part, I think it was more the latter. Like there were definitely parts, especially like I mentioned with that like weird manga scene where it's all like black and white panels flying by. It's like it's intentional that there's 5 people talking all at once saying different things and none of it makes sense. And like that is definitely intentionally part of it. And I don't know if going back is the way to handle that. Like I don't think that looking back on this show retroactively from the end is even necessarily the best way to enjoy it. Like, I feel like this show really is, there's a feel to it that reminds me of certain video games that like you're supposed to play it again. Like you play it again and it recontextualizes it, like a new game plus that has extra stuff built into it. And I feel like that's kind of how it's supposed to be. If you really are interested in that stuff, that's how you're supposed to enjoy it.
Right. And I mean, even when you're talking about the manga panel, that's where they stuff their fastest exchanges, and in fact, their pun runs, and like it's not something you can really grasp since it's all Japanese puns,
yes.
And you're busy, like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah, there's some very strange. I did notice that word play was happening, and sometimes I feel this way about the show in general. Is like not being a native Japanese speaker. Like I'm sure I feel like I missed a lot. even with a dub, I feel like I still would have missed a fair amount, because there are points where they're clearly playing with words, and if you have no context for what it is, you're just missing stuff.
Right. Were you getting that in some of the scenes where there were obviously being meta, either about, possibly earlier Gynax shows or other stuff? Were you seeing where it's like, oh, obviously there's something going on here. I don't have the full context, but I know that they're doing something that would make more sense if I had more exposure or I was native.
I mean, I felt like that was the case. I don't know that I would be able to put my finger on particular points in retrospect, but like the entire show felt like that was kind of the point, was that you were supposed to miss stuff, and then fill it in retroactively. But like, so the idea that there are several layers that I just didn't understand or wasn't ready for, especially in one viewing, like I felt that way at the start, and I feel like that feeling was reinforced as I watched more of the show.
I hope you at least were able to pick up quickly on the South Park reference.
Well, I mean, they were pretty blunt with it.
I find it pretty hilarious that they almost put in that long a South Park reference.
Yeah, that was good.
But, so I want to go ahead and jump in here real fast. This is a question that I meant to ask earlier, and I didn't get a chance to. I just kind of forgot. Brandon and Bama, we'll start with Brandon. Fully Cooley, like CT mentioned in his introduction of it, had a pretty strong reputation in the community once upon a time, and when it got a sequel series, 2 sequel series actually this past decade, it kind of revived it and brought in a new generation of fans. Had you ever, I realized that you'd never watched it before, but had you ever even heard of it before? Had it ever crossed your field of vision? And we'll start with Brandon.
No, I literally had. I feel like I have. Like, I feel like there are elements of it, having watched it and seen stills and stuff now, where I feel like I've seen parts of it somewhere before, but I have no idea. Whatever it was not direct. That's for sure. I had never heard of it.
Bama, over to you. Have you had this ever crossed through your field of vision before?
Yes, actually. I'd heard of it, and I was actually looking forward to seeing it because I had heard of it. And I heard it was absurd and wacky and cerebral. And yeah, so I think maybe that's part of why I'm so disappointed, as I had some higher expectations. I ran across it on TV Tropes, I think. The TV Tropes website. And it just sounded like the sort of thing I'd be interested in. Also, at one point, I almost stopped the thing, and I absolutely looked up a YouTube video. I do not know the guy's name, and I didn't write it down, which is, I'm mad at myself. I thought I had. But go to YouTube and type in "I wish I was a lesbian" anime. It's a song about "I wish I was a lesbian," and someone did an anime music video using a lot of Fooly Cooly shots, to the point where I was like, oh my gosh, I know that guy. He's the "I wish I was a lesbian" guy. And Andy's looking at me funny. It's a great video, actually. You should go check it out. It's fun. But yeah, so I had seen it, or seen bits of it without any context, and yeah, I'd heard of it. So the answer for me is yes.
And that was recently, though, not excuse me, not back in the day when you had, because it's not too far forward of Evangelion, but I assume you had actually bowed out before it was a thing.
Within the last 10 years, no more than that at this point. Maybe the last 15. Just those two little snippets.
Gotcha.
So getting into the latter half of the series, the latter with the climax episode, I want to go ahead and get into this a little bit. Let's go ahead. Let's start with CT. So the ending for this series, was it meant to attempt to tie up any loose ends? I'm honestly not sure how many loose ends it left behind and how many it tied up, because it was just, like I said, for 6 episodes coming at me so fast that I had trouble keeping up at times. So I'll let you explain this to me.
I think ultimately it does wrap up enough. I mean, you get an open-ending you get an open-ended situation with Haruko, of course, because she's just going on to chase the Pirate King, apparently into One Piece or wherever he escaped to. Uh, but but her role was not that of healthy relationship, uh, love interest, to be a thing. She was, the vehicle of chaos, but ultimately, certain color and growth. And in the end, what the final scenes they have between them are more about Naota just being, emotionally truthful. The fact that you have the after things where, he doesn't go off chasing her or pining over her or mommy me or anything else. He's just, okay, I'm still here. I'm still in the town. I don't resent it the same way I did before. Ninamori has a very similar arc to his, as they're coming to a form of maturity that reflects themselves, not some weird ideal that they went in having it. Mamimi's arc, such as it were, again, she is no longer held back by an unhealthy relationship, both with her memories of Tasaku and her attempting to use Naota as a proxy. So the fact that she took off is represents her overall arc. The rest of it is just sort of a, we've gone in, we've experienced a whole bunch of the normal confusion and awakening in a quite literal crazy form. But the town that Naota inhabits at this point isn't, the drab one anymore. Kanti is still around. He's just doing at this point what you hope he wants to, and whether he chooses to chase anyone in the future or ends up settling, down, it's something that he's been able to come to. So as much as the through lines for all of the characters is emotional and experiential rather than anything plot wise, the plot doesn't matter, it's just a vehicle for insanity. I feel that it is actually pretty well wrapped up in the end. At least the threads come together, and it doesn't represent an ending for anyone in particular, but it represents an evenness that the characters have come to that's, snapped them out of their overall true juvenile behavior and into something that's more healthy and capable of them growing through. So I think it ends well enough, certainly for a 6-part OVA that spends so much time in madcap hijinks.
So, Brandon, we talked about your impressions from the first half. After you had a chance to get used to the series, as it were, what were your impressions from the second half after you had settled in and kind of figured out, figured out the pacing and figured out, the general conceit of what you were going to be getting? And did the ending stand out for you at all, or did it all just feel like it came to an end and that was it?
Uh, I feel like so. I think going through the last half, a lot of the things that I was questioning in the first half, like what the themes were and things like that, which I feel like I probably would have had a better grasp of in other series that, in the first hour or so. In the second hour, it was finally kind of settling. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is kind of what this is. It's slice of life, kind of hometown growing up and people leaving and all those kinds of themes. So I think I felt more comfortable, if anything, with the second half, which I don't know is maybe intentional. It is a story about, again, growing up, and the end is very much that, right? Like things end sort of, but it's really supposed to be a transition. That's kind of what the whole show is about. And so I don't know that I think it really ties up anything except that, I don't know, my Mimi is out of the picture. She is just gone. She is doing her own thing because she needed to get the hell out of town because there's too much baggage or whatever, is kind of the feel I got. But aside from that, I felt like it didn't really tie up anything, but I felt like that was appropriate, if anything.
Bama, how about you? After you had settled into the series, what did you take away from the second half, if anything, or were you just, praying for blissful quick release?
Sweet.
There was a little of both. not gonna lie. I liked the second half better. I'm not sure if that's because there was a bit more of a plot and there seemed to be a bit more of a cohesion. I remember thinking that if I had seen the second half first, I might have been a little more open to the idea that there is some sort of deeper meaning to all this insanity. Um, on the other hand, I was pretty high at that point, so I don't know how much of that was just an altered state of consciousness that was letting everything come in a little bit filtered. It ended more cohesively than I was expecting it to. I kind of wish that they'd explained about the eyebrows a little bit better. The eyebrows just, I don't know. I couldn't help but love them. I loved the eyebrows.
Yeah.
They were
I
definitely well lampshaded.
I wish nobody was talking about them. I wish that they were considered completely normal, because that would have been I would have liked that even more. But I suppose everyone has to notice the weird distracting eyebrows. The guy loses his eyebrow. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it ended. The ending was more cohesive than I was expecting it to be. But yeah, I was praying for some sweet release. The only note I took for the final episode reads, and I quote, "For the record, the Monty Python hand doesn't make sense even when you're high." So there you go.
Oh no, man, it had stigmata in it. Therefore, there must have been some higher religious meaning to all of this.
The whole thing
right?
was, yeah, I don't know. I really love what CT said earlier about how the plot doesn't matter. It's just a vehicle for insanity, and I can't help but wonder if that is the point. It's supposed to be this this very dreamlike simulation.
I wouldn't disagree.
That certainly feels more appropriate because, frankly, I don't know how you build a plot over just having a particular brain that teleports matter across light years. And it's a power that can allow the Pirate King to steal whole to steal whole star systems, and that's what Haruka is going after. And it's like, but they're not exploring that in any way other than, you know, he's always got weird stuff growing out of his head and it'll turn into things, and most of the time there's some kind of phallic or psychosexual meaning to it, or it gets passed over as an insecurity to Ninamori in episode 3. It just goes places. But you're not really supposed to follow.
So I mentioned earlier that this past decade, Fooly Cooly did get 2 sequels. It got Progressive and Alternative. You'll have to forgive me if I got those in the wrong order. So my question is after watching this initial show, how likely are you to go into one of the sequel series, or both of them even? Brandon, how about you?
I think I am going to have to rewatch this first before I can actually answer that. Like, I need to like actually grok the things that are happening and how they tie together. I am interested if this show, if I watch it again and it actually pans out in the way that I hope that it does.
I think you
Bama?
might. Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I was just going to add to that I think you might not just rewatching, but possibly doing the thing where you're seeing what other people have been talking about it. Not in the reading Mal reviews, although I've been very entertained reading Mal reviews because they tend to fluctuate between 10s and 2s. And Mal reviews are not great in general, but these I'm particularly entertained by. But I think chewing over for yourself, but also just getting more brains on the disseminating certain characters, because there's a lot of particular enjoyment, I think, for a lot of people about Mommy Me, because she seems to be the most messed up but most human of the folks, and perhaps one of the ones that you can learn the most out of. But it all comes down to, does this work put you in the mindset that would even, encourage you to, or does it just come across too goofy and shallow to bother? And I think that's where the aesthetic and the experience can is going to make or break it for most people.
Absolutely.
Bama, how about you? How likely are you to check out either of the sequels?
I don't think I'm gonna do that. I feel kind of bad. I'm glad Brandon seemed to enjoy it. I was hoping that one of us would, because I think it would be pretty boring if we both didn't. But I this really just kind of wasn't my jam. I remember watching about 15 minutes of Bo, and I mean, I really thought I was going to like it, because I like things that are loony and crazy, but it was too much. And I watched about 15 minutes of it, and then I was done. And I think if it wasn't for this podcast, I would have done the exact same thing with Fooly Cooly. Watched the first 15 minutes and said, "Welp," and then turned it off and watched curling. Which we actually did. We watched the Sweden versus Canada. No, Sweden versus somebody. Can't remember. Sweden won. I think it was Sweden versus Russia. It was supposed to be a Spanish production, but they had dubbed it into English. It was hysterical.
There are certainly a number of them that, I generally enjoy a lot of the more absurdist and experimental sorts of things. To swivel back to something that LB mentioned in the beginning, one of the other reasons that I think throwing Furikuri out here early was good is I believe this is a bit of a stepping stone for the eventuality of getting to something that we both like a lot more and probably want to test them with, and will be a true test of getting through a number of other things, and that'll be for the Monogatari series later on.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought you were about to say Kill la Kill, and I thought I was going to have to kill you.
No. I mean, I enjoy Kill la Kill, but I don't have a necessity to go into the trigger works, and this feels, very much like the first experiment going down the triggery direction, even though the director isn't one that went to that studio. Tsurumaki, in fact, largely stayed attached at the hip to Hideaki Anno. So while he did Furikuri and would go on to Die Buster, which I also enjoyed, he then went into all the rebuild of Evangelion movies, and he was a part of the end of Evangelion movie prior. So he feels like the one that would have led most specifically to Trigger, but there's more involved in what they do. But I mean, being able to have something where there's an experiential side to shows like Monogatari that you simply cannot keep up with, and it's building a tiny bits of immunity here. But I've noticed for all of the people that I try to share certain absurdist things with, I can find almost no rhyme or reason why one of them appeals to me and another one doesn't. Why someone really enjoys Harakawa Under the Bridge but hates Excel Saga, whereas I love both of those but really don't enjoy other things. So when you're in this kind of area, it just seems to be amazingly unique to a taste that I think people just can't quantify. And I forget your specifics, LB, about certain other ones. Obviously, you've gone through a lot more like that, and I know the Trigger-esque direction doesn't appeal, but I know a bunch of the other ones do, and I'm not sure if you are the same type where you're not really sure why one particular thing, in the same way that certain humor. And a lot of this is obviously gag humor going as a through line through Furikuri as well. Do you ever find yourself with the ability to really explain why one set of it you find great and another set of it you just find, hair pulling?
No, I mean, comedy is just one of those subjective things that there is no. I have long since given up on trying to figure out, why why one thing is hilarious and why another thing is not. Excel Saga, like you mentioned, is hilarious. I love that show. On the other hand, Arakawa Under the Bridge, not so much. Uh, but I mean, you could even go into, say, Puni Puni Poemi as a extreme example of absurdist comedy that I really enjoyed back in the day. But, I don't know if I would still find it all that hilarious. It's been quite a few years since I visited it. Um, so yeah, but absurdist comedy in particular is definitely very subjective, even from a personal point of view. I would love to be able to articulate exactly why, oh, well, I found this joke to be particularly stimulating in a positive way, but I can't.
And one of your comments, I think, makes sense to wrap around to the trainees, as it were. I came to Furikuri as outside of the normal range, but I know that it was on Adult Swim in 2003. I know a lot of people who seem to like it experience at an age where they were possibly Naotas, or at the very least no older than Mommy represented in here. So, starting with you, Bama, do you think this would have sat better, or at least differently, and in a way that you might have found more appealing if you were hitting it at a time that's more age representative of the characters? If it's comparing to other things that you watched of that time, how do you think? Obviously, you have to imagine it, but
Yeah.
but how do you think it might have landed at that point?
That is a very intriguing question, and I honestly, I'm having a hard time coming up with an answer. I honestly don't know. I realize that sounds like a cop out, but I don't feel like my tastes have changed all that much. Although I could be wrong. I mean, I'm a little more sure of myself now, but I don't think that would
And
have
that
affected how I felt about the show. The only thing that I think would have really made a big difference is if instead of watching it all at once, which is what I did, um, I watched the first 3 episodes and then break for a hockey game and aforementioned
hmm,
curling, and then the last
sure.
three, but all in one day. Um, if it had been sliced up into 10-minute chunks,
Hmm.
doled out daily over a couple of weeks, I might have liked it a little bit better. Because, like you said, there is just so much coming at you. It reminded me of Looney Tunes, and I love Looney Tunes. It reminded me of the really old Looney Tunes, like the Little Skeleton Symphony and the
Hmm.
Merry Melodies, where they were back in the black and white era. I didn't really think Fooly Cooly was very funny, but it was very manic. And I'm wondering if maybe if it was in smaller chunks like the Looney Tunes tended to be, maybe it would have gone down a little easier.
And over to Brandon.
I think I like it more than I would have at that age because I think I'm probably more comfortable sitting with the uncomfortable parts of that show than I would have been. Um, and I think too, like parts of it are dealing with parts of adolescence that it's hard to process properly at that age, or it probably would have been for me at least. Like in retrospect, when you look at it, I can like point to certain parts of it and be like, okay, this is a really weird way of going about this particular part of adolescence, but I kind of get what the feeling they're trying to capture here is, and I understand that feeling. And I think had I been younger, I don't know that I would have necessarily either A, really understood that part, or B, would have been comfortable with it. Like I probably would have sat there and been like, yeah, that's a little too close to home, and like kind of bounced out of it.
I was just gonna say, when you asked me the question, I pulled my brain back to myself in my early 20s and couldn't find much of a difference. But if I pull it back to age, say, 12, when puberty is starting to really hit hard. I'm a girl and I hit puberty early. So 12 is about when all the insanity really kind of hit. I I think I could have related to it better, but I think instead of rolling my eyes at the panty shots, I would have been absolutely horrified because I was very, very prudish. And I think I would have hated it for that. So, no, I don't think I would have
Well,
liked it age 12, but for a completely different reason.
I think the portrayal of women in it is particularly rough, partly because that's kind of the intent. Like it is fundamentally a very adolescent way of looking at women. Like, um, oh god, I can't remember what's her face on the Vespa. She's basically like an older woman with tattoos. Basically,
Yeah.
it's using a very particular archetype to talk about Naoto is like what he's going through and what he sees in women and trying to process it. And I think it makes it very hard to find any of the women relatable in any way. Like I found it like at first I was like, man, this is not doing a good job until I realized that was kind of the point, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier to get into either. That's probably one of the toughest parts of it is like a good portion of the characters are portrayed in not very good light because of the way they are kind of being leered at. But the show also, I'm not saying it's trying to give the women agency, but it is absolutely saying that these women are using the way that he looks at them to their advantage all the time. um, which is not the same thing as agency, but at least, I don't know, it's saying something.
Well, I see where you're coming from, and that makes sense. And it's very true. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. They give the women a lot of power, but they don't give them a lot of agency.
Yeah,
It's like we're
absolutely.
very, very powerful, but you know what? There's nothing you can't get to choose how you're going to be using this power. And maybe that really is a lot of what my problem is with it, is just that I'm female and this is a guy show. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about like the panty shots, right? And I was like, maybe that because in my head, the way I was framing like his relationship with women is like this boy seriously like wants to be stepped on. Like he is so into women using him that it's ridiculous. And in like episode 4 or 5, when he starts to like come to terms with this, the revolution like in his brain is not even that he's like, oh, these people are using me and that's bad or anything like that. He's like, these people are using me and I like it. And he like leans into that, you know? So it's the way that it looks at women is it has almost like kink built into it in a strange way. So like the panties thing is probably because it's taboo for a boy that age to be looking up girls' skirts, right?
right.
Where you may not relate to that because that wasn't a taboo that you were taught. You know what I mean? Or at least for you, potentially. And so like I feel like a lot of the things are built into like a very, very particular perspective. And unless you're like really looking at that and trying to understand that particular thing, I don't know that it is necessarily enjoyable. Um, and it can absolutely very easily be offensive, and I entirely understand that too. Um, but I do think that it's dealing with some very particular things, like the the women are very much using men. They are using the way men look at them for their own gain. And so it's playing in that space. It's aware that it's doing that, but it's very uncomfortable.
well, Haruko is certainly using anyone and everyone, and
Sure.
definitely is the biggest abuser in here. I mean, look at Eyebrows there.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
obviously trampled all over that dude, and he
yeah.
is fixated on her still, even while trying to warn Nyota away.
Mm,
You know, he can't get out of her shadow, and
yeah,
that certainly parallels Mamimi, who can't get out of Nyota's brother's shadow and has
right.
been basically abusing him as proxy. And I feel like the reason that she leaves at the end is now she can't see Nyota as anyone other than Nyota at that point,
Yeah,
who she doesn't like, and therefore she has to give up on Tasaku and make something of her own. I think overall Nina Mori comes across very well because she doesn't get a lot of screen time, but she parallels quicker and easier the emotional journey that Naota kind of goes through. In
yeah,
hers, she's rebelling against certain expectations. Uh, she's showing, obviously, a bit of affection and wants it from her parents, from conceivably Naota. But in the end, she's gone through the thing where, the trope of cutting your hair.
yes,
Well, she did cut her hair at some point, but it was all off screen, and she's busy in the casually doing the popsicle thing, which is simply an acknowledgement that she is more mature generally.
yeah,
uh, that Naota will eventually catch up to. Her arc is behind the scenes and doesn't involve him for more than the one episode, but at the very least, between both of them, they eventually get to a healthy place and healthier.
yeah,
But she's also, basically pre-adolescent or going into adolescence. That's their journey to be had here, whereas Mommy Me, should have already gone through this and been able to control herself. And Haruko is a crazy alien, so it hardly matters.
yeah.
She does represent some good things, but she also represents a whole lot of evil impulses.
Mhm.
Uh, so in in the end, the, there's a funny part to this that I think that LB can chime in on as well, because I've hit this with other people experiencing certain older anime,
Mhm.
uh, and bringing up certain things that's extremely fan servicey or heavy panty shots. Like, honestly, the thing that at the time and still strikes out at me is the general shortness of Mommy Me's skirt, which was barely tissue paper.
Yeah,
But that's part of her character. But I'm so jaded on it from anime in general that I barely notice that kind of thing.
yeah,
And it's a little bit interesting to hear it given as much emphasis as you guys have been, because there are just so many examples of things that are 1,000 times worse than this that I have experienced. That a lot of them come up and I'm like, oh, that's cute. Wait a minute. So I don't know. I know you didn't like it in general, LB, but on certain things about it, whether it be panty shots or general fan servicey bits, uh, how does it play out to you, and how much does it get defrayed by just the madcap nonsense factor as well?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the series goes a million miles an hour 100% of the time. It doesn't let up in the slightest at any given point. There's always something going on. There's always something new being said that may or may not be important. There's always something else that a visual that may or may not be important to the overall story. And it's so difficult to take all of that in and process it and be able to think back on previous episodes and be able to go, oh, okay, I remember seeing that. That was probably important. Because it's always going so quickly, I didn't have the ability to do that. It was just way too frantic to keep up with. So, I mean, in terms of overall like fan service and such, yeah, there's plenty of, material in this series that is objectionable, but compared to the many harem and ecchi series that I've watched over the years, this is cute in comparison.
Okay, so it's not me. I just find certain times it comes up and it's very straightforward, and I just sort of blink and I try to remember what was going on. Like I don't really remember that. I feel like I'm either not paying attention or right. It's a level of weird jadedness that after you've watched a few hundred of these crazy things for 30 years, your brain is in a different space for it.
I have a strange question for all of you, because LB was talking about stuff being important to like the story and plot. Is anything in this supposed to be important? Because I kind of feel like the show is intentionally saying that none of this is actually important.
I don't tend to think that as a plot it's supposed to have any real coherence that you can invest in. I think that of the elements that are there, what isn't euphemism or gag fodder is just there to be either something because it's a vehicle of them just stream of consciousness out crazy things. Sometimes it's just to get a particularly zany action scene, or just to be highly imaginative. But I think for the most part, it's in service of certain concepts that you can, invest in or not. But certain representations of power, representations of chaos and unpredictability. Obviously, there's the heavy-handedness talking about smoothing things out, and how do characters approach comfort and conformity and uniqueness and other things. I think everything that's going on is simply there to be conceptual and not plotical in any way that makes a difference, because it's so hard to grasp or follow, and I don't think you gain a benefit by being able to put it into some level of coherence about brain halves communicating and transporting matter over light years, and there's a giant pirate king that can steal star systems, and he's Haruko's ex in some fashion, and she wants to steal his power. That that doesn't strike me as a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that like the plot in particular is intentionally absurd and not necessarily important. I just meant sort of in like it's got a very I was drawing parallels of this show to like American movies about like coming of age, and that one summer where things happened, but they are maybe important to the person, but like there's also like an acknowledgement of a sort of lack of significance cosmically. Like this thing happened, but it didn't change anything except for how I see things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's largely what it does by the end.
Yeah.
You get the sense that Medical Mechanica and their crazy iron place, it's still there. Yeah. The robot is still there. but folks of maturity, they've had their experience, but he hasn't left in pursuit of similar.
Yeah.
It's my life is the change, but I've matured enough in a way that all of this, there's still the remnants of what happened around, but it's just representative of the journey that this particular season led him through. And I kind of feel like the follow-ups are trying to play more into actual plot, so I'm not sure what will amount to that, because that feels like the wrong kind of thing to attach to.
Well, I do want to say that I'm so glad that we discussed this, because I feel very dumb admitting this, but I didn't the phallic imagery of the stuff coming from his forehead literally did not even cross my mind until we discussed it just now. And it literally didn't even cross my mind. And so now I'm kind of wondering if the reason I wasn't crazy about this is because maybe it's very much about a very masculine male adolescence concept, and that's why I didn't get it. It's not really for me anyway, and that's cool. I'm okay with that. Because yeah, I didn't get it. Sorry.
Well, hold on. Let me. There are some interesting quotes from the director, but I think this one is worth doing. There'd been a number of interviews with the director, who, as I said before, is kind of Hideaki Anno's protege and was heavily involved in Evangelion and a whole bunch of Gynax stuff. And he was sort of given ropes like after Eva. Anno was just sort of, okay, well, it's your turn next. What do you want to do? And that's what turned into Furikuri. So in the way of how did this even get made, it was just kind of, what do you want to do? And this is what he felt like doing. But one of the things he had to say for a question, for all of the fans that are confused at all, if you had to define in one sentence what Furikuri is about, what would you say? And his response, Furikuri is the story of boy meets girl. For me, it's also about how it's okay to feel stupid. With Evangelion, there was this feeling that you had better be smart to understand it, or even just to work on it. With Furikuri, I want to say that it's okay to feel stupid. So by design, baked in to all of this is the level of just offhand. You're supposed to you're supposed to be confused by it all. Well, I was going to ask, because this is one of the things I mentioned at the beginning, and Bama had mentioned Looney Tunes, and I guess one of the things, now that you've all experienced this kind of thing, I mean, there's a lot of sort of farcical stuff in Western animation and other things, Looney Tunes to a degree, things that go high concept madcap stuff like Rick and Morty. But does this strike you that, like, does this fall close to anything else from another medium that you've experienced or know about? Because I was, when I was choosing it, I was having a hard time thinking of something close to it, and I'm curious if you were reminded of anything in totality or just in certain aesthetic or experiential parts of it.
Not. Go ahead.
I was just, it made me think of a few things, though I don't know how apt it is, because oddly enough, like I liked the absurdness in this, but I haven't generally been a fan of that kind of stuff in like Western media, like Ren and Stimpy. Like it made me think of like Ren and Stimpy mixed with Beavis and Butthead. with because obviously like the music and things like that. And I mean, let's face it, if it's meant to be stupid, like it's okay to be stupid, like Beavis and Butthead kind of yeah.
I can
But
I can feel
those
that.
two those two were kind of in my head a lot in terms of like this. It almost felt kind of like abandoned town Americana type mixed with that really ridiculous nonsensical quality of Ren and Stimpy. But those aren't even shows that I particularly like. Generally, I never really cared much for those. Like, so it's actually maybe odd that I enjoyed this.
And what about you, LB?
I honestly don't know if I would compare it to anything in Western media. I have watched a lot of absurdist comedy over the years from various countries and various mediums. I don't know if I could compare anything in Western media to the madcapness of Fooly Cooley, though.
Right, this particular level of it. I feel like I'm too close to the anime side of it, so I can see all the tendrils through other Gainax works and Trigger works. I was wondering whether or not another perspective would shine a light on something different. I'm finding it far too easy to go down exactly the same path with some of the very same creators.
The closest
Uh,
thing I can think of would be a three-ring circus. Because there's yeah, literally, because there's so much going
sure.
Yeah,
on. And I mean,
but
I don't know. Everybody's my age, right?
you're
Y'all had circuses? Oh,
So now is this more Barnum and Bailey or Cirque du Soleil?
Barnum and Bailey's the only one I've seen. I haven't actually done Cirque du Soleil, sadly. Um, I say sadly. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't like it. But yeah, I remember my mama warning me. She said that it was better on TV because you didn't have to try to decide which ring you're watching. And when
Hmm.
I actually went to the circus in real life, that was exactly she was right. Because there's a show going on over to your left, a show right in front of you, and a show to your right, and you don't know which one to watch because they're all going on at the exact same time. And that's that would be the closest I would come to this particular anime.
and somehow all three acts are relevant to each other, and so
Yes, exactly.
Now I guess before we go entirely, the you mentioned music and a connection with Beavis and Butthead, so I guess because this is one of the things that sticks in the community as well was the pillows basically became the soundscape for the entire show at that point. It's hard for me to even remember. I think they had one scene with a kind of classical open source thing, but basically it was all obviously very heavy with electric guitar and the band itself. So it's very much an alternative rock, J rock kind of feel to it. And I know for a lot of people, that's one of the things that really sits with them is the soundtrack and appreciation for the band in general. How did you guys find that either fitting to the show or just enjoyable for you in general? Was the kind of the unitone for everything about it and coming out of effectively rock songs rather than what the type of thing that you got from background music and vocal songs and everything that, for instance, we experienced with Madoka Magica. I guess I'll pass that to Brandon first.
I mean, I really liked the music that I remember. uh, I think I don't know that I remember nearly as much as I would have liked, considering how much I was trying to process at any given time. Um, I I did really appreciate that having. It's not a type of music that you very much hear in just about anything. Um, and I did, even while I was watching it, get feelings of like sort of late 90s like punk, that not like classic, like, you know, down with the establishment punk, but the sort of like Blink 182 era like angst punk. um it felt like that was kind of baked into the show, even though the music wasn't necessarily that kind of punk. It did have a little more rock to it. um but yeah, like, it was parts of the culture of the music felt like it was baked into the show in a way that I kind of appreciated.
And Bama?
Okay, you know the little meme of the puppet who looks both ways very uncomfortably? I do not remember a single thing about the soundtrack. I feel really bad now. I remember
Did you
exactly zilch.
did you listen to? I mean, there's, I suppose, to a degree that there's just an overall. I mean, they're wielding electric guitars, so the fact that there's so much electric guitar soundscape to it, you're be they're being brained over the head with
You're
guitar
right.
sound effects, so that would blend in no matter what. Uh, did you listen to the ED? This is one of the endings for the shows that I think for a lot of people ends up on their topping top list of endings of all time. Was that something, or were you skipping just to get to the next part of the show?
I I honestly don't remember, which seems to indicate that we were probably skipping, but no, I don't remember the end credits or much about the beginning credits even. And that doesn't
It
mean
didn't
that
really
the
have an
music.
OP in the conventional sense.
Okay,
It
Yeah.
yeah. I'm really sorry,
it
everybody out there listening. That does not mean that the music is not memorable. It just means that I don't remember it.
I got to the last episode, I think, before I realized there weren't like opening credits to the show. I was like, wow, that's different. Uh, but yeah, the just that riff with the sound waves on the screen.
down down down.
Ba-da-da-da, yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
one of
that's
the
good.
most memorable
And
damn stings that.
and the closing credits are basically, they are very reminiscent of like a punk sort of music video, right? The riding around on the scooter, like sped up to, like, you know, 10 times speed or whatever, you know, like it's got a very punk feel, even just in the way it's presented.
Yeah, and a lot of live action mixed
Mhm.
in with
Yep.
certain scenes. And do you have any real connection to it, LB, either from back in the day, the first time you were watching it, or re-experiencing, or pillows ain't your kind of jam?
I mean, I like the ending theme song. It's never made it onto my iPod before, and I don't see it being added anytime in the near future. And the soundtrack, while in the middle of the show, is just so blended into the madcap action that's going on that it's hard to pick it out. So yeah, so I didn't have a particularly deep connection to the music in this series.
Okay, it,
So
it
I
at
have
least felt like an appropriate thing to talk about.
yeah, I have one last question that I want to ask to Bama and Brandon. So we'll start with Brandon. Now that we've established you in the absurdist genre of anime, if CT and I were to recommend another series that fell into the absurdist genre later on down the line, would you be hesitant to check it out, or did this series give you an idea of, okay, this is what anime can do, bring it on?
I think I'd be down for it. I do think that I'd probably want the heads up of whether or not I'm supposed to really follow what the hell's going on. Um, I just like I definitely enjoyed this, but I think I was probably trying too hard to try and understand what was happening in the beginning. And so as long as I kind of have an idea, I'm totally down for more absurdist, wacky anime stuff.
And Bama, how about you? How hesitant would you be if we came up with another absurd comedy sometime down the line, far, far down the line?
Giving appropriate mental space.
I would be hesitant. I'm not gonna lie. I'm still willing to do it. I'm willing to give this another shot. But between this and the 15 minutes of bo that I felt like I could handle, I I would be going into it with a raised eyebrow. And there, that's not to say that I wouldn't come away from it thinking it was wonderful. I mean, that's entirely possible. I've been known to be weird and change my mind. But yeah, at the moment, I would be looking at you funny going, okay.
All right. So, did anybody else have any closing questions or comments?
This is an extremely particular thing because it was one of the gags that I found funniest early on, and I found it so weird that it was thrown away once. But right as Haruko was first introduced, where you have the slow motion of her flying towards Naota and doing like the 3D matrix spinning smooch, as it were, they break away to the characters acting like they're actors talking about the scene where they're like, "Oh yeah, it's real annoying to hold your breath during that," and
Oh
then
yeah, that was funny. I liked
Naota's
that.
like, "Did you?" I thought it was going to be a thing, and I'm not sure if I'm saddened that it was thrown away, or if I feel like if they had broken away more often after doing some of the most ridiculous stuff, whether or not that would have made it more approachable for folks. It's just a point of amusement for me.
I enjoyed what little instances there were of that kind of thing, of where they like explain, actually just explain the joke to you or whatever. Like there are just certain instances where they do that, or like they're literally just looking at like, this is the thing that happened. We're going to actually say the thing that happened. um, like there's a metaphor of the dad basically just becoming like a desiccated corpse because he's just like had been neglectful or something, and so it's like got Naoto like pouring water over him to like rehydrate him by giving him attention, and it's like actually saying, well, I was like neglectful or whatever. And it's some of those things are just like, yeah, no, we got the imagery, but I appreciate you just being like, we're just gonna say this.
Fourth walling around.
Yeah, like not saying it directly to the audience, but it is talking directly to the audience.
Just seemed to be one of the things they were experimenting with. They were kind of tossing. That seemed to be one of the bigger things about the show, was just being experimentalist all the time, picking a particular direction for an episode, throwing things in, and not even revisiting them. Which I guess I don't know if it has a definitive appeal for most people, but at the very least, I think that's one of the things that makes it.
All right, let's go ahead. Let's wrap things up on that note then. Thank you to CT, Brandon, and Bama for joining me this time. It was a lot of fun discussing this with all of you.
Good
Thanks.
times, all.
Oh yeah, talking about it's more fun than watching it. I thought.
And on that note, thank you to all of you for listening to us talk about this for the last hour and a half. If you want to check this out before anybody else, be sure to visit us on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Otaku Review, where it'll go live for a week before it hits the major podcast providers. If you want to leave us a little review or a rating or anything or a subscription, that would be really beneficial to us and we would love it. Other than that, have a great night, everybody, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.